Again, as we wait for the press secretary, everyone, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says he never considered resigning. You know, this was a big controversy this week with NBC News reporting that, in fact, he did look at it. President Trump siding with his diplomat, tweeting, Tillerson never threatened to resign. This is fake news put out by NBC News. Low news and reporting standards, no verification from me. Tillerson has been the subject of much speculation after this NBC News report claimed Vice President Mike Pence had to talk Mr. Tillerson out of resigning and that he had called the president a, quote, moron. Fox News military analyst General Jack Keane joins me right now with his impressions on this story. And what do you think?
Well, first of all, I've been around Rex Tillerson a couple of times discussing national security, foreign policy with him. Didn't know him before he got the job, and I'm impressed. He's well seasoned. He's comfortable on the world stage. He's a great representative of the United States in terms of foreign policy and national security. Seems like an incredible straight shooter. You just have a good feeling about the guy. So when he tells
jump in
me,
and say his background, by the way, just to remind everyone, I mean, when you're running a company that is that size, it's almost like running a small country. So you've got the management experience, the CEO experience that I would think would lend itself very well to state.
Yeah.
But finish your thought.
And even though it was a public company, it certainly never had the scrutiny that being Secretary of State has. And I think that's a new mantle he's kind of taken on here. And you know for a fact that when it comes to the media, he's a little bit more shut down than more previous secretaries of state are. All that said, I mean, if Tillerson is telling us that, listen, these stories are persistent, I just want to clear the air, I've never given any thought to resigning, why wouldn't we accept him? What is the reason we would not accept Tillerson? He's an honorable man with character. And if he says, I never called the president a name, it's just not in my personality to do something like that, let's take him at face value.
You got NBC News doubling down on this, saying, no, we stand by our sources and we stand by this story, which, you know, to your point, if the main character's involved, whom we call primary sources, you know, you think back to your history papers when you'd write and you'd get a primary source. You've got primary sources that are saying, no, this never happened. So then it seems to be turning the quarter into just a bunch of gossip and innuendo, and we shouldn't be trafficking in things like gossip and innuendo.
A few weeks ago, we were dealing with McMaster the same way. He was in some kind of trouble with the president. The president didn't like some of the briefings he was giving him. He talks down to the president. He's condescending. All of these kinds of things. And I know HR very well. And he said, you know, sir, he refers to me like, he says, none of these stories are true. And he said, we have a pretty orderly, systematic process. And yes, the president asks us some pretty tough questions at times. And yes, he may not agree with all of our recommendations. I personally think that's good government. These issues are so tough and complicated. To think that you could always have consensus by our top national security leaders, Mattis, McMaster, Kelly, Pompeo, Tillerson, that's unlikely. And the fact that they don't always agree and they have different viewpoints is something that is good for the president.
Here. I mean, you want that diversity of viewpoints around you, and you want people tussling back and forth and advocating for one thing or another. As president, you listen to everything and you make a decision. General, is it because in part, well, you know, we talk a lot about media bias. You're well familiar with it. The media is very obsessed with this administration, very obsessed with all things Donald Trump. They have been ever since he announced that he was, you know, putting his hat in the ring. So is in part that they're just filling this void that the public is curious and the media is extremely curious, and there are many members of the media that have a bias specifically against this president and the administration, and thus it results in what we're seeing.
Well, the media in Washington, I've seen, has always been somewhat interested in who's winning and losing on any administration's team. But what has happened with the Trump administration, I have never, ever seen it. They pounce on the smallest little things. They blow it into some major story. Yes, are there people over in the State Department that may be a little disenchanted with Secretary of State Tillerson? I would assume so. And that's true of any other Secretary of State that was over there. Secretary Kissinger told me one time, he said, you know, Jack, he said, the one thing about the State Department, regardless of who is the Secretary of State, most of the people in the State Department believe they do foreign policy better than the Secretary of State. quote unquote, from Henry Kissinger.
At least they have confidence. Well, there you go. Yeah, and that's a big part of it, I'm sure. Well, General Keane, always good to see you. Thank you for coming all the way in. Thank you very much.